All right, welcome everyone to another edition of Podchaser Pro's webinar series. Thank you for joining us today on a Friday, no less. Very excited for this session. So today our special guest is going to be Shauna Nuckles from Advocation PR. I had the benefit of attending a PRSA Counselors Academy conference back in April in Charleston. And I attended many sessions, but the one that stood out the most to me was Shauna's session. And within Shauna's session, which is going to be a lot like what you're going to see today, I found myself writing the most notes, taking the most pictures with my phone, saying yes and nodding quite a bit. And there's a big reason for this. So Shauna will get into a lot of her background, and obviously we'll get into the nuts and bolts of her content. But as someone who came up in the agency world, about 10 years as an operator within agencies and about 3 years as an owner within agencies, there was one thing that always struck me, and that was, how do we get repeatable revenue? How do we get repeatable processes? How do we build something that can be sustainable instead of chasing new clients after new clients and hopefully winning RFPs and bids and that sort of thing? So when I saw Shauna's session, I thought this is like the perfect rip and replace that you could use for Podchaser. And what do I mean by that? So it's obviously no secret. Most folks who do invest in a Podchaser Pro subscription typically have clients that are saying, hey, we want to be on podcasts, whether that's because they see their industry peers on shows, they see competitors on shows, that sort of thing. But what happens after that? So once you get your subscription, how do you turn podcast guest booking, podcast monitoring into a repeatable part of your business that's going to be predictable from a revenue perspective as well as from a process and output perspective? So I've talked about this quite a bit, and mostly because of my experience running Podchaser Connect, which was our former guest booking agency that sat on top of Podchaser Pro. And we had a very ad hoc process where we would chase down clients, have very different scopes of work depending on who the client was. And within the first 3 to 6 months of kind of me taking over that division, one of the things that I knew we had to do if we wanted to scale the business was to productize our services. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. But instead of listening to me drone on about it, as you probably have in at least a few of our sessions, we're going to bring in a true expert into the conversation. So without further ado, please welcome Shauna to today's session.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'll give a quick 2-second spiel on me, and then I will pull up my slides and we can get into the good stuff of the presentation workshop today together. So I run a company called Advocation. We are a training and operations consultancy that specializes in operations for PR, marketing, digital, creative, kind of everything under that umbrella business model. And our big objective is to increase stability inside of agencies to then yield scalability. And our goal in all of this is to do it in a way that reduces chaos so we can scale without burning our teams out or wanting to burn our business down to the ground. And a big piece of what that is are how you set up your services. And the topic of conversation here, is Trent teed up for us, is how do you productize your services in a way so that you can create that revenue on repeat. So without further ado, let's dig in here. Specifically on this topic, I like to call this, how do we turn your agency into a cash machine? And to get there, we're going to dig into how do we identify the right idea? So pinpointing profitable ideas for service offerings that align with not only what the market needs, but what your agency is really good at. Pricing strategy. So you've got a great service. How do you price it to ensure that services are competitive and also profitable? And then how do we deliver it in a way that, as I mentioned, doesn't burn your team out or make you want to burn your business down to the ground? A couple of housekeeping pieces before we dig into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. I do have a gift at the end for everyone, and not a gross, hey, get $100 off if you work with us, but a complimentary seat inside of our best-selling masterclass that goes deeper into this topic. So we'll share a code for you to get that access to that at the end of the presentation. And something that I want everyone to understand is this is really meant to be a workshop, give you the tools so that you can take the information away and modify your own services, introduce new services to make meaningful change and impact inside of your firm. And to do that, there's a couple of indicators we have throughout the presentation. So guided homework, if you see a slide with the pointing emoji like this, that indicates here are some prompts, here are some questions for you to do some homework and take action inside of your firm. So screenshot, take a picture, feel free to save those slides down so you can refer back to them. And then same thing for a handful of framework slides. We've got our cash money symbol for frameworks that we execute with our clients, the agencies that we work with, to guide working sessions. So same thing, take pictures, screenshots so that you can run these sessions with your own teams and just really take as much from your time here together back to your business as possible. And moving on here, one important mindset shift that I like to share before we dig into this type of information is, in the back of your mind, think about your favorite product, how you engage with it, what you like about their business model, why you purchase those products as a consumer. We are all in the service-based industry and a service-based business. And the way that we think about products is just a little different. So I, for example, love my Nespresso machine. I'm not a big brand gal, but my Nespresso machine is what does it for me. I love that I save money on purchasing coffee shop quality espresso, that I can make that rolling out of bed first thing in the morning. I love that they're a B Corp and they prioritize recycling all of their pods. And from a business perspective, that really gets my gears turning in terms of, why do I engage with them? Why do I talk about them? Why do I continue to be a consumer? How they have me kind of hooked into their business model because I purchase pods again and again. And there's nothing I necessarily want you to do with that information besides just start thinking about, well, how do I engage with products? Because we're finding that middle ground in between services and products when we are productizing our services. And that just kind of helps solidify some of the lessons that we are going to dig into today. So some of you might be asking the question, well, what exactly is a productized service? I want to make sure we're operating from the same context. And this is how we define it. At its core, a productized service really utilizes technology, it utilizes process, positioning, and a handful of other strategies to create leverage and scalability inside of your business. And the first thing that usually comes to mind are courses or ebooks. It's common when we're working with agencies, they say, great, I'm going to launch a course that teaches people how to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to have a lead magnet that is an ebook. And not that there's anything wrong with those ideas, but we're really thinking beyond courses and ebooks. And the big reason for this is they're a different business model. So we've looked under the hood of countless agencies, seen their P&Ls and the reality that no one's really talking about when it comes to introducing a productized offering like this is you're spending $800,000 a year on ads to make $1 million, right? So the numbers are much different for a service-based firm, and there are plentiful opportunities to introduce productized services that fit much better with the business model of running an agency or a service-based business. And really what I'm trying to achieve is I selfishly want a business where if I put $1 in, I know that I'm going to get $5 out. And I can put a service on a conveyor belt and push it to the end and reliably get output, outcomes, and consistently do that again and again. Specifically, we're seeing productized services also become more relevant in today's landscape, largely because of the challenges that many of our peers are facing. So this was a survey done at the top of the year of the top concerns of agency owners in 2025. I don't think any of the notes numbers on here will surprise anyone. Folks are concerned about new business, they're concerned about growing their revenue, and they're concerned about adapting their services to new and evolving trends. And productized services really helps address each and every one of these and then some.
Just real quick on trends, if I could,
Yes.
Shauna. We're living in the middle of what I'd call like the podcast renaissance. So COVID era, pre-COVID era, podcasts obviously got very popular as we were stuck inside, didn't have much else to do. Then there was a lull between 2020, late 2022 and early 2024. A lot of folks have dubbed the 2024 election as the podcast election. You wouldn't believe how busy Podchaser has been since that happened because of this kind of cresting wave of podcast resurgence in terms of mind share, market share, attention, that sort of thing. So for those of you that are on the call that hopefully have already using Podchaser Pro, you understand that clients are asking for these types of things. Maybe you've taken the leap yourself because you understand media newsrooms are shrinking across the map. This is a trend that we want to ride, and we don't want to do it haphazardly, which is why we want to frame it within this productized service kind of model. So
Beautiful. Yes, that's a great ad. Perfect. So we're on the same page in terms of context, landscape, the opportunity that exists to productize your services. So let's dig into how you really identify the right idea for a service. So this is, feel free to raise your hands or nod to yourself. There usually is no shortness of ideas for productized services when we're in a room having a conversation like this. We're creatives, lots of visionaries in the room. Ideas are in abundance. But often what we see are agencies who follow a process that looks a little something like this. They have an idea. They say, we need to launch X, Y, and Z service, a service that does this. Our clients seem to want this. They say, great, let's launch it. They spend lots of time building the thing, web page, materials to sell it, templates, etc. They introduce it. They get very little traction. And then they go back to the drawing board. And this is a continuous cycle that we're running through again and again. And this is common. We're not playing the shame game here. Lots of agencies, most agencies kind of get stuck in this cycle. But when it happens for years, we've seen agencies go through this cycle for truly decades. It becomes not only frustrating, but demoralizing for the team, lack of ability to build momentum. And it can be challenging to get off of this hamster wheel and actually build momentum that is meaningful to your bottom line and provides a great outcome for your clients. So the big thing that I want everyone to take, truly, if you just took one thing away from this entire time together, I'd want it to be this. Productization really is not about introducing a new service offering, launching a new offer, having a new idea every month and stacking on tons of new services. It's about identifying a new structure. So we don't want to have a pyramid or a tree where we're just adding a bunch of different things to the branches. We want a stable business model that allows us to scale as big, far, and wide as we want to. So where do we start? Specifically, we start in something we call define your swim lanes. I'm a former swimmer. I think this gives a nice visual of, more than anything, defining your specific rules of play for introducing a new service offering. First, pointy slide. So if you want to take a picture or screenshot when we get all the way through this, please do. But these are what your swim lanes are. So who is your ideal client, characteristics of your target market, and ensuring that you are tailoring your services effectively to speak to them. Deeply understanding the problem that you solve. We've got our target client identified. What are the specific issues that they're facing that you are solving through the service that you provide? What services are you actually the best at? So this isn't about looking at what competitor A and competitor B are offering and making sure that you've got something comparable. Really think about, what do you uniquely provide the most value around? And then also thinking about the outcome you are or want to be known for, really honing in on the positive results that you want to build your reputation around for delivering. And what I will say and add to this, this is not revolutionary business advice. You've probably seen this in hundreds of business books and heard it on all the podcasts. But what I will say is professional service firms can get away with not following these best practices and get away with it for a very long time. We, especially think in this industry, are so great at positioning ourselves to a specific person. So we can talk to prospect A and say, great, you need blah, blah, blah. We can do that specific thing for you. We'll fit our services into what you're looking for. And then you talk to the next prospect and you say, perfect, we can take this away, add that to it, and then so on, right? You can go on and have these one-on-one conversations endlessly. And same thing, we're not here to play the blame game, the shame game, but this, you reach a ceiling pretty quickly in how you can scale a business when that is your approach to not only selling, but delivering your services. And the truth is that the reason for that is that's how a door-to-door salesman does business, right? Talk to one person, sell them the thing. Talk to another person, sell them the thing. But if we're looking to truly scale a business and create that productization and scalability, we have to think about shaping our services in a different way. Our first cash money slide. So same thing, take a picture here. This is a template we use with the agencies we work with to build an ICP, an ideal customer profile. This is the ideal, perfect place to start when we're defining our swim lane so that we know exactly who we're speaking to, the service that we're providing, and the solution that we are offering to them. So we've got our swim lanes. Now on our path to identifying the right idea, we're looking for leverage leaks inside of the company. So these are the leverage leaks that most commonly show up when we're auditing the firms that we work with. We're looking at what services are you customizing each and every time, what is bespoke and unique every time that the team is delivering it or selling it. Where are your bottlenecks? And specifically, where is the team moving more slowly than they should? Where are decisions getting held up? And specifically, what's bogging the team down? And then lastly, where is our profit just evaporating? We're losing our profit inside of the business. And that's another area where we look for leaky buckets inside of the firm. And what this looks like in practice is we walk our agencies through a framework called our service scalability matrix. And the goal here is for us to find the intersection of leverage and profitability inside of a firm. And the goal is moving all of your services, or most or a percentage of your services, to this top right quadrant, which we call flagship services. This is true productization of your service, high leverage and high profit. And what I really like about this framework is each quadrant is paired with actions, specific actions that you and your team can take to increase leverage, increase profit, and overall build momentum inside of the firm. So flagship service offering, these are our services where we know we put $1 in, we get 5 out. They're working, we want to maximize, amplify those. So we're focused on lead gen. Let's get more clients in the door, training programs so that when we sell new services, expand our client base, it's easy for us to bring new employees, team members in the door and expand. And then templates and documentation so that if employees leave, we're not losing institutional knowledge with them to execute these services that are the bedrock of our firm. Below this, we have our white glove or our bespoke services. Most of the firms we work with, the goal is not to get rid of bespoke work. This is oftentimes the fun, custom, very strategic projects that people really enjoy. But the goal here is we really have to have rock solid scoping accuracy, getting enough budget for these projects so that we are not losing our profitability and moving over to the left side of the quadrant. And it's also incredibly important that we are discerning with the right type of client for selling these services. So going back to our swim lanes, because not every client for every agency is going to be the right fit for a high touch service. And then of course, even though it's a customized bespoke white glove service, there will always be opportunities to increase leverage. So looking for those, can we templatize something? Can we get a tool that removes a couple of hours worth of work from this team member's plate? So looking for those opportunities to increase leverage. And then on the left-hand side, moving into the bottom left quadrant, this is low profit, low leverage, which is where we do not want any of our services to be. And this might be something that the agency is doing because it's a passion project. Hey, we know we're not going to make a ton of money on this. This means something to the team. We're doing this for a different reason. It could be that you're doing it for the first time. You say, oops, next time we got to charge more for this. Or it truly could be a time sink. And when we're looking at services in this quadrant, top goal, how can we increase leverage and profitability? But also it's important for us to prioritize our time and our resource allocation because we can't have the entire team working on services that are not driving revenue for the company. And we always recommend with the firms we work with, do this exercise once, but we really recommend doing it at least annually. And if you are seeing services stick around in this low profit, low leverage, quarter after quarter, truly year after year, if we're coming up on year 2, year 3, and you've got services that are sticking around down here, it's really important to make those tough decisions and know when to call it. And then top left quadrant, high leverage, low profit. This might be a situation where you're doing something for the purpose of something besides profit. So, hey, maybe we're doing a workshop and the goal is not necessarily revenue, it's visibility or reputation or another benefit to the firm. This might also be a market misalignment. So the conversion is not necessarily happening. So if you're in this top left quadrant, we are looking for crystal clear clarity on what your desired outcome is, because if it's not profit, we got to be clear on what it is we're getting out of it and really making sure that you're dialed in and speaking to the right audience. And sometimes just making that quick change pivots you over to being a flagship service offering. This is a bit of an anonymized example of filling this out with a client. I think this client was, gosh, probably a 7 or 8 person PR agency. And this is common when we go through this for the first time with firms where most, half, a large portion of their services are falling into this low profit, low leverage quadrant. And the immediate response for most is to say, oh my gosh, we have to figure out how to get everything out of this quadrant immediately. And from our experience, I'm going to ground everyone in what really is realistic and how we typically make decisions around improving the scalability of the company. Because looking even at a year out, no matter the size of your team, we can't do everything all at once. And sometimes services are landing here because they're not a good fit. And so going back to our swim lanes, looking at the client we're speaking to, the problem that we're solving for them, what we want to be known for, we identified the top 3 services that align with those swim lanes that we defined and build a plan for 9-12 months to move these specific services from here to here. And the goal here is, right, this is where the productization happens. And in this specific instance, the productization of these services, so you can see some of examples of how this works and take these and execute these with your own team. We productize these services through what we call leverage levers. So one was positioning, right? Talked about the swim lanes. We know the target audience, really met their specific needs. And our goal here was to modify and update these services so that they were a hell yes for those customers. And then we looked at packaging. So we started to combine services that really complement each other so that there was more of a cohesive customer journey. And this is where retention comes in, right? So this is where we can go from, we put $1 in, we get $5 out, and then we get $5 more out, right? That's true scalability. And then this firm specifically, founder-led firm, they really wanted to be in a position to extract them from all client delivery. So we really looked at process, and this included role delineation, who's doing what and why, and delivery systems that were repeatable, and a tech stack that was up-leveled and started to remove some of the needs for these roles inside of the agency in the first place. All right, we have our swim lanes, we have our leverage leaks. Last on our journey here of identifying the right idea is tightening up your service stack overall. And this is really where, when we think about a full service stack or our service suite, all the services that we provide, our goal here is to have services and a combination of services that do not leave retention and upsells to chance. We want to offer the right combination of services so that clients stick around and stay. And to go back to that example, that's how we go from put $1 in to get $5 back to get another $5 back, right? And rhetorical question, again, we're not playing the shame game here, but how many of your services look a little something like this on your website? We've got buckets of services and everything that we could possibly offer under those core buckets. And the goal here is to just list everything that might be compelling to a client. Most of the agencies that we work with position their services like this. And I'm not necessarily saying, cut it, stop doing this. I know this is an SEO best practice, so continue to follow that. But when we're looking at a service list like this is not scalable. This is really how someone pulls something off a shelf, and it's more like a vending machine than a cash machine, right? So how we start to modify this and think about changing this list is, there's no target audience specificity. So really thinking about who are these services for and tailoring those offerings so that you can communicate about them effectively. There's not a clear customer journey. So start to think about how you can create a really comprehensive customer journey, and that includes touch points and takes into consideration the full client experience, so that when a client is done with this service, it's clear to add this one. Or if they're doing this service, once the budget is available, they'll add this one. And then lastly, that really allows us to develop strategies for upsell and retention so that clients stick around and are loyal to our firm and our team.
Real quick on the target audience specificity, I just wanted to bring up an
Yeah.
example that we had with Podchaser Connect. So we did quite a bit of work in the higher ed industry, so colleges and universities, and we typically would go through the university PR comms department. But what we started to find out is there's usually one or two people that are chiefly responsible for increasing or maintaining a university's institutional reputation. And that usually comes through how they're ranking in US News and World Report. And in having a lot of conversations with these individuals within the PR comms department, part of the university, they had a couple different initiatives that they had to hit, which was one, getting faculty research out into the ethos, right? So podcast guest booking was an incredible way to do that because they didn't have the ability to go out to every major publication and talk about what XYZ professor was doing when it came to astrophysics and jet propulsion systems, right? There's just not that big of an audience, but there's a podcast for that. So when you can get that level of specificity in your target audience, so in this case, it was going to be, again, those institutional reputation marketers and communicators within universities at an R1 or R2. It doesn't get much more specific than that, but that's where it really became a hell yes, as Shauna alluded to earlier, too.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And really understanding, well, we have some examples of how to get into this later, but then you can really articulate the value to that specific audience for the service in a way that is meaningful to them. Because getting on podcasts, right? Let's secure you a podcast interview is not as easy of a sell of, well, let's get you on a podcast interview because it will allow you to reach X, Y, and Z stakeholder in order to achieve blah, blah, blah for your organization. And that's going to be different for every industry, every type of client. So that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Amazing. So next, cash money slide. If you want to take a screenshot framework, this is a framework that we use with the firms that we work with, and we call this an ascension model. And this is how we think about combining up several of the components that we've been talking about up to this point, right? So specific client profile, level of bespoke services inside of our firm, productized services. And this is a little bit anonymized, but an example of an agency where we built these ascension models inside of their firm. Their founder had a goal of exiting and selling the firm in 18 months. I think we did it in 15, but the goal really here was, how do we standardize the business that you already have, capitalize on that success, and then copy, paste, modify, and introduce a new service stack to a similar, different audience. So this was a personal branding and executive thought leadership firm. They built their reputation on personal branding for small businesses and entrepreneurs. And we built this service stack that includes both productized and bespoke, services, and really baked that into a customer journey that got people to stick around and stay. So folks enter as a client, they get a strategy that follows a proprietary process and framework that this agency followed. They don't have an endless budget to hire an agency for ongoing execution, but they often did have budget over the next few quarters, years for projects. So we had standardized projects that were productized, templatized, that could be added on after the strategy was completed, right? So a landing page for their keynote talk, speaker reels, photo shoots, and had a set of these. And then on top of that, if there were, we kind of ran through all of the standardized projects, exhausted our options. If we had a client who had a need above and beyond, we had custom projects that we could build, modifying those standardized projects that we created. And then at the very tippy top, we had coaching that the team of personal branding experts could offer. And this really allowed us to retain clients long term. On the flip side here, we modified this service stack to speak to a new audience. So executives inside of Fortune 500, large tech companies, et cetera, and updated the process, updated the templates, updated the customer journey to speak to that audience. So still coming in for strategy at the very beginning, but we're looking at doing cohesive strategic planning for an entire C-suite for executive thought leadership. They do have the budget and the desire, often need an extra set of hands for ongoing execution. So there were standard retainers for managing their PR, managing their podcast interviews, LinkedIn thought leadership, internal newsletters, etc. We same thing had standardized projects on top of that. And then at the very top with bespoke custom programs where we might brand 7 or 8 thought leaders inside of one company and build a large cohesive program. So this is what the Ascension model looks like come to life, really thinking about that customer journey, where we're embedding productized services, where we're embedding bespoke services. And something that I think is so great about having the level of detail and specificity around the services that you offer and the audience that you're reaching is you can then start to bake your marketing into this Ascension model and customer journey as well, and think of it as a productized service too. And that's what this agency did here, where every piece of content, every campaign that they did really laddered up to one of these 2 Ascension models and was just such a cohesive part of their customer journey. All right, this is our meatiest section. So summarize, solidify what we've talked about. Good ideas for a productized service. They come from really understanding an ideal outcome for a client and understanding who that target audience is that you're reaching and tailoring your solutions to meet their needs. We look for our biggest opportunity for leverage and focusing on areas that can yield the most significant impact inside of our firm. So our leverage leaks and opportunities to shore those up. And instead of thinking about your services as a standalone, hey, I'm going to launch this idea, I'm going to launch this idea, really think about the full service suite and ensure that things complement each other so that we make upsells and retention a sure thing. All right, so we have the idea. Now, how do we price it? So I wouldn't be a good operations person if I didn't say profit doesn't happen by accident. So that's why we're talking about pricing in this piece here. So before we ever look at pricing strategies, we're looking at, do we understand what it costs to deliver that service? So team time, tools, technology expenses. This is important to consider when we're building pricing strategy for a service. Paired with that, what's our overhead? Got to know those numbers, fixed and variable costs, administration expenses, what's your run rate? And then we also like to back into not just understanding what our profit margin is, but setting a goal for our profit margin. And that opportunity of constraint often yields creative solutions that, instead of saying, hey, we're going to do this the standard way, 10% profit at the end of the year, having some conversations around, well, what does it look like if we're at 20% profitability, 25% profitability? And that's usually what we're aiming for with the firms that we work, is reaching that upper echelon of 20 to 25% profit margin at the end of the year. So we use 4 common pricing models when we are pricing or thinking about pricing for new services inside of a firm. Again, pointy slide, screenshot, take a picture. The first pricing model is time for money. So I think everyone knows what this is. Very common in the consulting world. It's 10 hours times whatever your billable hourly rate is. Very common in our space. We have value-based pricing. So this is pricing based on the perceived value of the service to the customer rather than the cost that it took to produce it. And then we have performance-based pricing. This means that our fees are determined by the results or actual performance achieved from that service. And then we have productized pricing, which is usually set based on your brand perception, market, and that demand for a certain product or service. And I always find that when we think about pricing for a service, it's a little hard to pin down because there are so many not intangibles when we're offering a service, right? Time, strategy, level of expertise on the account. So I like to ground us in using an actual product for how we're thinking about this. So using everybody's favorite product as an example, an iPhone. If we were to price an iPhone based on these 4 different pricing strategies, it would look something like this. So if we're pricing it based on time for money, we pay $22 an hour for every hour that it takes to assemble an iPhone. If we were pricing it based on value, we're paying for whatever the value that the iPhone brings to our life, a percentage of that, a portion of that, how valuable whatever it brings to our life actually is. Performance would be, we're going to pay for how many hours of efficiency an iPhone actually brings to our day-to-day lives. And then productized pricing is we pay whatever Apple says because we want an iPhone. So we know which one Apple has achieved here. When it comes to an agency, usually time for money is the lowest leverage and the lowest reward type of pricing, but it is also the lowest risk. So as we go through these different pricing models, there's different levels of risk and reward, right? Time for money, low leverage, but it's also low risk. Productized pricing, you really have to earn this from brand, reputation, market demand. So it's a very challenging place to start. Performance-based pricing, oftentimes it's too risky for most agencies. There are some industries, models where it does make sense. It's a lot of risk. However, for a lot of agencies, it can be unethical. I know for PR agencies, it's a gray area ethically. So that can be the challenge with performance-based pricing. For these reasons, we usually start with value-based pricing, and it tends to be the ideal place to start to bring some more leverage to your pricing strategies. And when we're thinking about the top ways we can articulate value in our pricing, there are 4 common ones that we see. There's time. So if our services provide something more quickly to a client, what's the value of their team not having to wait for that deliverable? There's access. So if they get access to the founder of your firm to elevate their strategy in X, Y, and Z way, what is that worth and quality to them? There's money. So if you're providing a service, that means they don't have to bring on lots of new tools or hire more headcount. What is the hard savings to their team? And then there is ease. So are they staying up all night worried about achieving a certain goal? Are there stressors that you can alleviate? That is ease. A few examples in the quote unquote wild, these are examples of productized services that we've helped firms actually launch using these different articulations of value. We had a firm launch a website in a day. So that's an example of articulating time as value. So they had a proprietary process. They could launch and build a website in a day. This means clients don't have to wait around months and months to launch a new product. Value there is, hey, you're saving months of payroll, and you're also saving the opportunity cost of lost sales because you can go live tomorrow instead of 6 months from now. Access, an example of this, we had a firm host brand identity sessions. And the way they articulated this is, hey, do you want to build an award-winning brand? You can spend a day with our founder who's done it 20 plus times. And the way we were able to articulate value here is, what is the value of having an award-winning brand? And for prospects and clients, you can anchor that to whatever the value of brand is for their industry's market leader. Here's an example for money. We had a firm introduce a thought leadership service for tech startups and positioned it as, are you looking to build credibility to raise funds for your tech startup? You really need to execute executive thought leadership for 12 months to have the best runway for success. And they were really able to anchor their value of their service in the millions of dollars of funding that could potentially be raised by increasing their credibility and reputation. And then ease. We actually have lots of agencies who are exploring offering some type of fractional CMO service right now. The conversation positioning around this is, hey, are you spending all of your free time wrangling contractors and part-time employees and junior folks to market your business? Get back your time. The value here is you're sleeping, you're less stressed, and you can actually focus on the business objectives that are going to move the needle for you. So we've got the right idea. We know how we're going to price it. Next, how do we deliver it? This is a mindset shift that we often have and encourage the agencies we work with to really think about. So we have agencies who come to us and just say, hey, if I just had an SOP for this, or I just need a process documented for this, and everything would operate much more smoothly. You can hire an intern to document a process. There are tools that will follow your screen and document the process for you. We don't ever start with an SOP. We start with a framework for execution, which allows us to ground our team in what we're doing, why, what are the steps to get there. And it's an opportunity for intellectual property that really ends up being the bedrock for a productized service. And at the end of the day, our experience has been your framework for delivery, your framework for execution actually is the product for your service. So I'm going to walk through the best practices that we have found from launching our own services, refining frameworks for the agencies that we work with. And then I'm also going to share a handful of examples of what these look like in terms of frameworks that you might already be familiar with. So what makes a great framework? They are clear and simple. They allow your team to follow along a process and have the necessary context. So when you are not in the room, they're not just pushing buttons and following a process that's written down on paper, but they understand what it is you are aiming to achieve from an outcome-based perspective and why. That leads into our next point. They are very outcome-based. So we're not just, hey, we're going to follow step A, step B, step C, and the process is done. They are rooted in how do we orient ourselves and our team to achieve said outcome for ourselves and our clients. They include key stages or steps. So really boiling down what the process is, what our steps and stages are for achieving that ideal outcome, and really focused on providing direction without too much complexity or overwhelming your team. And they also include signature tools and your signature point of view. So the great thing about a framework, as I mentioned previously, is they're not just a roadmap for your team to execute. They are incredibly powerful for intellectual property, using them in marketing, positioning yourself as a differentiator. So baking in what is unique to you in terms of, hey, we approach this problem in this way, or this is a signature tool that we use, allows you to not only enhance effectiveness, but differentiate yourself in the market as well. So
Just real quick, if anyone's attended any of our webinars previously, you probably remember me reviewing content, context, audience, and reach, which is our framework to find best fit podcasts. So this is exactly what Shauna was talking about. There's 5.6 million shows you can find within Podchaser Pro. How do you find the very best ones for you or your client? Content, context, audience, and reach. So again, Shauna has been preaching to the choir with this, but I'll let you keep going.
oh, amazing. Well, you all are experts on what a framework is already. This is a framework. I like to use examples that everyone might be familiar with so that you can really start to solidify, oh, well, here's how we could create that for our firm. So I think everyone here is probably familiar with this is SWOT analysis. This is how you go through a process to identify the market position of a company and the opportunities to improve it, right? Typically, this is very deep strategic thinking, and this framework allows us to bring in junior team members to support research, to communicate to prospects, a process that we follow to achieve the outcome of here's your position, here's our strategic plan to improve it. And, I always just think about, imagine if you were the firm who developed the SWOT analysis and that was something you could bake into your process of pitching and selling, the level of credibility, the ease in which your team could execute a SWOT analysis and really provide that outcome so that you could really create scalability around strategic planning. I think this is a great, really simple example to just solidify that idea and the power of having a great framework. Many of you might be familiar with this. This is one of my favorite frameworks. I think it's absolutely brilliant. From Jenny Dietrich of Spin Sucks. If you're familiar with the PESO model, this is their framework, and it is the pillars that are required for a truly comprehensive communications plan to build reputation, credibility, trust, thought leadership, authority. And you can see here, there's a process that's followed, there's clear stages and phases, and it is very clear what the outcome is. And same thing, this is very strategic, high level thinking. But when we anchor our thinking in this way, we can bring other team members along to execute for a vision and also communicate our results to the client. This might also be a framework that you're familiar with, EOS from Gino Wickman's book Traction. This is how they recommend you execute building a strategic plan for your company, has different phases, frameworks. They do a really great job of pulling in their unique point of view, their unique tools. I think this is a really great example for people to start thinking about, well, how could we trademark our process for this? Or how do we name a process that we have and include that and build client excitement and team buy-in and package it and position it in a way where it's not just a process that we follow, but it's something that amplifies our own thought leadership as a company. So going back to some guided homework, so another screenshot slide, helpful prompts for developing your own framework are really think about what's the before and after. So you have a client who's coming to you with this specific challenge, and we're clear on who our clients are because we have our swim lanes. What is the after that you're presenting to them? And really think about the challenges all the way to what does post-service success look like? Really understanding what are the benefits you provide and the improvements to their situation from when they come through the doors. Think about the major stages of the client journey. So usually we recommend thinking about 3 to 6 stages, steps, or phases that clients go through. Sometimes this looks like an assessment, sometimes this is planning, and then you move into implementation, optimization, and review, right? That's a pretty standard process that folks follow, but how is this differentiated in your firm? What are the key stages that you walk a client through in order to achieve success? And we really like and emphasize this step because what we can often do is build services around those different phases and stages. So, hey, maybe you have a client who can only get approval for budget for the first phase. Great. How do you then lead into your service for the second phase? And this is where we really start to bake in our ability for retention and upsells. And then again, we really talked about this, but what are your unique tools, your unique methods that make this process transformative? It could be your expertise, it could be software that you've used or built, or strategic approaches that you've learned through your years of experience in the industry. My best advice is start messy, don't overcomplicate it. Truly, this process often starts with lots of scribbly notes on a notepad, post-it notes all over the wall. I always begin the framework process with an information dump and then starting to pull out our key processes and the patterns that we're recognizing. So start messy, get your ugly first draft out there. Don't overcomplicate it, just start it, and you can refine it over time. And we have talked about this, but just to double stamp, they're not just for execution. Use these in your sales process. Use this to build reputation. This is an incredibly powerful thought leadership tool and a really powerful tool for intellectual property for firms to have as well. And this truly is, to double stamp what we shared before, the foundation for truly scalable services. The framework, as I mentioned before, your framework tends to be the actual product. So iterate on it over time and follow that key process that we shared to just start brainstorming this on your side. So that's the conclusion of our presentation. We know how to write identify the right idea. We know how to price it, and we know how to anchor delivery to not burn our teams out or want to burn our agency to the ground. And as promised, this is the gift at the end, QR code. Screenshot this, take a picture with your phone. This should take you automatically to a checkout page where we've got a free coupon applied to get a free seat in our Leverage Masterclass, which goes deeper into several of these topics and expands upon additional strategies. So
Amazing, Shauna, as always. I know we've got a couple minutes left here, so if there are any questions, please fire away in the chat or in the Q&A section. Tammy, fantastic information. Good to see you, Tammy. Let's see. Angela, this was so good. Thanks, guys. My brain is melting in the best way, parenthetically. So that is good. Excellent.
I love that.
Yeah, if I could just maybe ask a couple questions as it pertains to podcasts and podcast guest booking, i.e. the reason why people buy Podchaser Pro. I gave some examples of how we started to position our offering and made it a more predictable process for our team members and that sort of thing. But I do think that so much of this comes back to the ICP generation. So when you provide that ICP generation template to your clients, how many revisions does that typically have to go through? Because I know it can be a somewhat uncomfortable process for folks to have to take away a certain segment of the market that they've always done fairly well with, but eschew that in favor of something that's tighter, if you will.
So honestly, It usually takes about a quarter to refine it if it's not something you've done before. And what I completely appreciate, it's scary to say, hey, we're going to say take away services and take away customers and tighten and define. The way we usually think about it is we're not, let's start just by defining one, right? And we're not going to say, hey, you can no longer sell to this client, you can no longer offer this service offering. But unless you have an endless supply of resources for marketing and sales and execution, you can't apply your resources to everything, right? So usually what we'll do is say, hey, this is the 2 or 3 customer profiles and the aligned services that we're going to focus on for the next year. So when we're thinking about templatizing, when we're thinking about improving delivery, when we're thinking about sales activity and marketing strategy, we're going to focus on these because they're defined and we're increasing our likelihood of conversion. And if you have clients who come through referrals, if you have clients who you meet at a networking event who are a fit for something else, you don't have to say no, but you can't, it's that same phrase, if you're everything to everyone, you're nothing to everyone, or how, I don't remember exactly how it goes, right? But that's usually how we start tightening that a bit. And oftentimes those services just fall away because agencies realize, oh yeah, we don't want to offer everything under the sun. We're not big enough to speak to anyone and everyone. So that's how we usually start to think about it.
Perfect. And then because this is such a transformational shift within organizations, I imagine it's typically going to start at the top. So maybe agency owner level, VPs, biz dev folks, et cetera. I would also assume though that once that this is in a good place and that there's cohesion across at least the leadership level, how much of this also has to be distilled down to individual contributors, even at the lowest rung and middle management and that sort of thing? Because it does feel like when you do go through some of these transformations, it does have impact on everybody.
Yeah. My recommendation is it varies on the size of firm, right? Because if you're a shop of 5 people, you're probably doing all of this work together. But you should talk to your team members who are doing the work as part of this process and include them in the brainstorming, include them in the decision making. If you're trying to build a framework, they probably have it. They probably have it in their head if they're an excellent executor. So my recommendation is at the strategic level, make the decision and say, we're going in this direction as a firm. We're prioritizing this. This is what this looks like for the next year, and make some strategic decisions. Perhaps that is, you have the data on where your revenue is leaking, which services are most profitable, where you're losing money, the clients that are the hardest lift and the lightest lift. Come with that information and perhaps get your ICP 80% of the way there. Um, that's how we make smart business decisions that are going to change the trajectory of our companies, but do include your team in the brainstorming, the ideation, get that buy-in early. We usually, when we're hosting a workshop on productizing a service offering, we'll host a series, right? Starting with the executive leadership team, getting that level of buy-in, and then having a process where we can bake in that feedback from all the individual contributors all the way up early on.
Perfect. I know even coming away from the session in Charleston back in April to today, you come
Yeah.
away with some really good ideas. Things start kind of ruminating in your brain. But as you've started to work with clients in this process, how does it go from I'm really excited about productizing my services to actually executing on that? I mean,
Yeah.
how do we build enough bandwidth mentally, business wise, et cetera, to actually start to put these things into practice?
It really comes down to prioritization. I think
Yeah.
that is the biggest hurdle that the firms that we work with really have to overcome. This is not, it's simple, but it's not easy, if that makes sense. Where the steps of, hey, we need to focus our efforts on these clients. Like once the data falls into place, it usually becomes very clear. The hard part, as we were chatting about in your previous question, is making the decision. This is where we're doubling down and trusting that and staying the course. Usually the example I'll share for the agency where I shared the Ascension model that we actually created for them, it took them about a year to really see the change in the implementation of that. But they made the decision, stayed the course, and we didn't get into any of this data, but a big reason why we wanted to shift for them was about 25% of their revenue was based on recurring retainer. 75% was on projects. It was really challenging for them to continuously refill that pipeline, resell projects. So we made that shift. And over the course of a year, it went like this, where 75% of their revenue was retainer based, 25% was projects. And that just became a much more stable business for them, much more compelling to exit and sell. So it really is, to your original question, the prioritization. We can't do everything, and you really got to stay the course.
Perfect. I know we are 5 minutes over, so thank you everyone for sticking with it. Angela did have a question. She has a service idea that would require some tech stack build out. Any advice on the vetting side? I'm happy to address that maybe offline, Angela. My email is trent@podchaser.com. Shauna, if you want to get in touch with Angela directly, I do want to be somewhat respectful of everybody's time here. But yeah, Angela, please do reach out directly if you'd like to. Shauna, any parting words for the audience today?
Thank you everyone for being here. This is a topic that I'm excuse me, incredibly passionate about. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always talking about this and my own content. And please stay in touch, and appreciate everyone for being here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We will get the recording out early next week, usually Monday or Tuesday. Have a great weekend, and thanks again to Shauna for sharing an incredible depth of knowledge and information. So, cheers, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.